I think overall, even though I'm partial to Don't Touch Me, because that changed my life. But
They call the Grand Ole Opry the mother church of country music, a sacred stage where legends rise, songs turn to scripture, and reputations endure beyond the final standing ovation. But beneath the warm spotlight and time-honored applause, a darker undercurrent has long gone unspoken. For Jeannie Seely, dubbed Miss Country Soul, those shadows have followed her for nearly 60 years. To the public, she's a glittering, rhinestone-clad trailblazer who helped reshape the image of female performers in a male-dominated industry. She made history by winning a Grammy, challenging dress codes, and refusing to be boxed in by tradition. But behind the bright lights and smiling appearances, Seely has carried the weight of silence. Now, at 84, she's no longer willing to play by the old rules. She's naming names, not out of spite, but out of truth, and breaking decades of self-imposed silence. These are not vague accusations. They are personal betrayals that came from the very people she once considered peers, friends, and confidants, members of Opry royalty who either directly or quietly block her path. Their actions didn't just cause pain. They symbolize a systemic problem within the very heart of country music's most revered institution. And now, in the twilight of her legendary career, Seely is done protecting those who showed her none in return. Jeannie Seely first stepped onto the Opry stage in 1966, holding her Grammy-winning single, Don't Touch Me, and wearing a miniskirt that caused a stir among the traditionalist crowd. She wasn't just performing, she was setting new precedents. Her appearance defied expectations and quietly rewrote the unspoken rules about how women were expected to present themselves on country's biggest stage. But not everyone celebrated her audacity. Stonewall Jackson, a longtime member of the Opry and a staunch traditionalist, took offense. Jackson, who had enjoyed uninterrupted success since the 1950s, reportedly bristled at Seely's growing prominence and bold style. His disapproval wasn't always overt, but it didn't need to be. Over time, Seely noticed her name sliding down the bill, her slots becoming fewer, and her invitations less frequent. According to sources close to her, Jackson used his influence behind the scenes to restrict her appearances. For a long time, Seely never named him publicly, but those familiar with the internal dynamic of the Opry knew exactly who she meant when she described a male peer who couldn't stand watching a woman rise faster than he did. This wasn't just about an outfit or even professional jealousy. It was a power play, one man exerting control over a woman he perceived as a threat. For Seely, it was the first brutal lesson about the machinery of the Opry. Talent and determination weren't always enough if the gatekeepers had already made up their minds. And it taught her something crucial. Success at the Opry often came at the cost of belonging. Perhaps the deepest wound of all came not from an adversary, but from someone Seely had once viewed as a sister. Fellow country singer Jean Pruitt. During the 1970s, the two women appeared to be allies. They shared stages, dressing rooms, and even advocated for each other in public spaces, forming what many perceived to be a powerful, supportive bond in a male-dominated world. But that illusion shattered in the mid-1980s when Seely learned, over a quiet lunch, that Pruitt had allegedly worked behind the scenes to block her from being nominated for Female Vocalist of the Year at the Country Music Association Awards. The information came from a former CMA committee member who claimed that Pruitt argued Seely didn't project the right image. For Seely, a champion of individuality and authenticity, that phrase cut deeply. Her so-called friend had judged her as outdated and unworthy, not based on voice or artistry, but on appearances and image politics. The betrayal stung not only because it came from someone she trusted, but also because it confirmed a devastating truth. In the industry, even supposed allies could become obstacles when reputations were at stake. Though Seely never publicly called Pruitt out, her refusal to appear with her or reference her in interviews spoke volumes. Some betrayals are so personal, so intimate, that silence becomes the only fitting response. And when trust is broken between women fighting the same uphill battle, the pain lingers even longer. Then there was Bill Anderson, Whispering Bill, a figure often associated with grace, wisdom, and gentle lyricism. For years, he and Seely maintained a seemingly healthy professional relationship. During the 1960s, they frequently performed together, with Seely even appearing on Anderson's television show. But in the 1990s, when Seely proposed a revival series co-hosted by elder statesmen and stateswomen of the Opry, she found herself once again sidelined. According to those close to her, Anderson initially expressed interest in the project, only to later pitch a similar concept, this time replacing Seely with a younger male co-host. The program launched without her, and she wasn't even informed. The message was crystal clear. Despite her decades of contributions, Seely was no longer deemed relevant or marketable. Anderson never publicly addressed the snub, and Seely never confronted him. But those in her inner circle knew how deeply it cut. This was a betrayal, not a friendship, but a professional trust and legacy. Anderson's actions suggested that even legends could be phased out quietly if they no longer fit the image producers wanted to promote. For Seely, it marked another bitter reminder that the Opry stage had limited space for aging women, regardless of their history. In 2005, Jeannie Seely took one of the biggest risks of her career. She went public with her criticism of how the Opry systematically shortchanged female performers. She penned an op-ed for Country Weekly, outlining how women were often given early, less favorable time slots, while men regularly received prime billing. She expected pushback, but hoped for at least one public ally, Garth Brooks. At the time, Brooks was enjoying a powerful resurgence and had privately voiced his agreement with Seely's concerns. He even promised to back her if she ever decided to speak out. But when the article hit, Brooks remained silent. No statement, no support, and that silence did more damage than open disagreement ever could. Without his voice lending weight to her message, Seely became an easy target. She was labeled divisive, and her Opry appearances began to decline again. For Seely, the pain didn't stem from being challenged. It stemmed from being abandoned by someone who had agreed with her in private, but lacked the courage to say so publicly. It was a reminder that even the most influential figures can fail you at the moment their support matters most. The final, unnamed betrayal, the one Seely refuses to ever say aloud, may have come from the most iconic figure of them all, Porter Wagoner. Known for his rhinestone suits and his duets with Dolly Parton, Wagoner was both a star and a tastemaker at the Opry. In the 1980s, as Seely was working on a comeback with a new album of original material, she approached Wagoner hoping for help. Maybe a recommendation, maybe just encouragement. Instead, she was reportedly dismissed outright. He laughed at her proposal, called her songs vanity tracks, and implied she was too old to be taken seriously. Shortly afterward, the record label distribution she had lined up fell through, and her opportunities on the Opry stage all but disappeared. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Those close to Seely believed that Wagoner used his clout to ensure she would not get another shot. She never spoke of it publicly, but her conspicuous absence from his funeral years later raised eyebrows. And in a rare, candid moment, when asked whether she held grudges, Seely responded, "There's one name I'll never say, because he doesn't deserve to be remembered fondly." That boundary was not theatrical. It was survival. It marked the point beyond which forgiveness is not just unavailable, but irrelevant. For Seely, the scars left by this betrayal confirmed her deepest suspicions about the Opry's inner circle, that often devours its own, especially if there are women aging out of the spotlight. For decades, Jeannie Seely remained loyal to the unspoken rules of Nashville. Be gracious, be grateful, don't air dirty laundry. The Opry was sacred to her, even when it didn't treat her the same in return. But at 84, she has nothing left to lose and much to gain by speaking up. Her courage doesn't come from anger. It comes from the weight of too many years watching others suffer in silence. Each of the 5 betrayals she now shares is more than a personal slight. They are glimpses into a culture exclusion that thrived on silence and submission. Stonewall Jackson used tradition as a weapon. Jean Pruitt dressed sabotage in sisterhood. Bill Anderson erased history with a quiet stroke of convenience. Garth Brooks, when it mattered most, chose comfort over conscience. And Porter Wagoner, perhaps the cruelest, cut off a career revival simply because he could. For Seely, telling these stories now isn't about revenge. It's about setting the record straight, not just for herself, but for every woman walking the same path behind her. The truth doesn't change the past, but it reclaims it. And sometimes The true royalty of legacy like the Opry doesn't lie in those who would cheer the loudest, but in those who endured the silences, survived betrayals, and lived long enough to speak their own truth. Jeannie Seely kept showing up, not because she was welcomed, but because she refused to be erased. What makes Jeannie Seely's story even more compelling isn't just the betrayals themselves, but the resilience she displayed in the face of them. For every door that quietly shut, Seely found another way to get on stage. She didn't just endure the sting of exclusion, she persisted. And in doing so, she became a silent revolutionary. Not because she shouted, but because she endured. While the Grand Ole Opry never officially banished her, it often made her presence feel conditional. Like a guest in a house she helped build. Her strength came from understanding that the music business was rarely fair and often political. But what Seely refused to do was become bitter. Instead, she redefined what success could look like for a woman in country music. She performed with grace, delivered vocals that still carried raw emotion decades later, and quietly mentored younger performers behind the scenes. Even when she wasn't getting the spotlight, Seely's career was a masterclass in survival. Not the glamorous kind, but the kind that requires you to swallow your pride, bite your tongue, and show up anyway. It's easy to celebrate legends who rise quickly and stay adored. It's harder to celebrate the ones who got knocked down, ignored, and deliberately kept off the marquee, but still showed up with dignity. The truth is, Seely wasn't just a singer. She was a bridge. She stood between the golden era of country's past and the more inclusive vision of its future. Even as she aged, her voice remained potent and her passion unwavering. And yet, her story reminds us that in institutions like the Opry, success is often filtered through relationships, reputation, and politics, where silence is rewarded and dissent is quietly punished. Her silence for decades wasn't submission. It was a calculated strategy of survival. Many women of her era were taught to hold their grievances in, to avoid being labeled difficult, bitter, or washed up. Seely knew the power of perception in Nashville. She knew that being labeled hard to work with was often the kiss of death, especially for women. So, like many of her generation, she smiled on camera, posed for photos, and kept her pain private. But that doesn't mean the pain didn't shape her. It did, and it made her wiser. It sharpened her instincts and made her wary of easy promises and backstage smiles. The betrayals made her selective about trust, but they also made her fiercely independent. She learned to rely on herself, to carve out opportunities without waiting for a green light from powerful men who control the stage and the spotlight. Over time, Seely's ability to survive and reinvent herself became a legacy in its own right. She began writing songs for other artists, co-producing her own records, and even taking charge of her own image. She wore what she wanted, sang what she believed in, and created her own space when others wouldn't share theirs. That autonomy came at a cost. Less visibility, fewer awards, and often a lack of mainstream celebration. But it also gave her something far more valuable: integrity. While others conformed, she remained defiantly herself, even when that meant losing favor with the tastemakers of Nashville. And that authenticity became her brand. In recent years, as the music industry reckons with its past, its exclusions, its biases, its silent complicity, voices like Seely's have become more crucial than ever. In an age of social movements and increasing transparency, her decision to finally name names isn't scandalous. It's historic. She is documenting a side of the Opry that has been conveniently left out of biographies and retrospectives. A side where power was wielded not just on stage, but in quiet conversations, booking decisions, and closed-door meetings. She's lifting the veil not just on her personal pain, but on the systemic culture that made such betrayals possible in the first place. And make no mistake, what Seely faced was systemic. It wasn't just a few bad actors. It was a culture that rewarded compliance and punished challenge, especially when it came from a woman. The betrayals she details are symptoms of a broader sickness that affected many women at the Opry. Some never spoke at all. Some left music entirely. Others changed themselves so much to survive that they became unrecognizable to those who once loved their work. In contrast, Seely remained steadfast. She held on to her voice, literally and figuratively. Her decision to finally tell the truth now isn't just an act of catharsis. It's an act of service. She's giving future generations a roadmap of what to look out for and what to reject. Her story also forces us to confront a painful truth about legacy. It is often shaped by those who write the narrative. And for decades, the narrative of the Opry was written by men who decided who got to be remembered and how. They chose the photos, the playlists, the features. They celebrated the singers who conformed and quietly omitted those who didn't. Seely's name was never erased, but it was sidelined, like a footnote to a story she helped create. By speaking up now, she's rewriting that footnote into a full chapter. She's inserted herself back into the record, not out of ego, but out of justice. There's also something profound about Seely choosing this moment, her 80s, to speak. Most people fade away or are forgotten by then. She could have remained silent and been remembered fondly as a gracious, long-serving performer. But that wasn't enough for her. She didn't want polite applause. She wanted the truth. And that kind of honesty takes courage. Not the kind you show on stage, but the kind that comes from standing up to institutions you've loved your entire life. Seely's love for the Opry was never in doubt. What hurt most was not being loved back with the same depth and fairness. Her story is about a lifelong relationship, complicated, painful, and profound, with an institution that gave her a platform but never fully embraced her. Her decision to call out Stonewall Jackson, Gene Pruitt, Bill Anderson, Garth Brooks, and Porter Wagoner isn't about vendettas. It's about accountability. Each name represents a different kind of betrayal, jealousy, sabotage, erasure, abandonment, and dismissal together. They form a tapestry of the kinds of barriers women have historically faced in country music. And by detailing them now, Seely is showing that what happened to her wasn't incidental. It was deliberate, patterned, and supported by a broader culture of silence. If there's one overarching lesson in Seely's journey, it's this. Silence may protect the system, but truth liberates the individual. She waited years to tell her story, not because she lacked courage, but because the cost of truth was too high when she was younger. Now, with nothing left to prove, she speaks not just for herself, but for all the women whose careers were stifled, whose dreams were delayed, and whose names were never remembered because they didn't fit the mold. Country music has long been obsessed with stories of heartbreak, of resilience, of redemption. Jeannie Seely's real-life story embodies all three. It's not tidy. It's not always pretty. But it's real. And like the best country songs, it lingers in the soul long after the last note fades. Her decision to speak now reframes her legacy, not as a passive pioneer, but as an active truth teller. Not every legend gets to write their own epilogue. Jeannie Seely is doing just that, and in doing so, she isn't just preserving her story. She's protecting the truth for everyone still trying to find their voice.